everybody, welcome. Thanks for joining us tonight for the future of women in STEM, preparing our girls now. We're really excited about this panel. We've got an amazing group of speakers, and I think we're all still feeling a little buzz from this weekend's events. And I know I have still been just like smiling ear to ear after watching the Vice President-elect Kamala Harris talk about the future of women in our country. And I think that really lines up well for our conversation tonight. My name's Colleen and I lead our programming for the Battery. I'm really excited about this event, in particular because our moderator tonight is Xochi Birch, who is the co-founder of the Battery. She'll be leading the discussion. She's really involved with our Women of the Battery group, which we actually have an event coming up on November 17th. So if you're interested in participating in that, you can find our information on the website. It'll be on board leadership and how you can be prepared to prepare yourself for that. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Xochi, who will introduce our discussion and our other speakers for tonight.
Great, thank you, Colleen. So good afternoon. It's lovely seeing some faces for the ones that are brave enough to turn on their camera. For the others, I'm looking forward to when we can see each other in person again. So first of all, I wanted to thank Colleen for organizing this. She will be monitoring the chat box, and I really appreciate that because I can't talk and look at the chat box at the same time. And we will have Q&A at the end, so please feel free to pop in any questions you have anytime you have them or when you're thinking about them. And Colleen will help me gather them up and send it over to me. So I think I'm just going to get started, and then when people jump onto the call, they can just, listen in. So for those of you who haven't met me, my name is Xochi Birch, and I'm the founder of the Battery with Michael. And it was surprising to me, but one of the exciting parts of the Battery are these smaller subgroups where we can get together and talk about issues that are relevant to us. And one of these subgroups is Women at the Battery, and we can talk about topics and issues that are relevant to women. And during this time, I've met amazing women and have had really interesting conversations around this topic. And one of the recent discussions I've had is, I am aware of automation and AI, but I've never thought about it in the lens of how it's going to affect women. And as you all know and probably can imagine, that automation and AI will change the future of work. It's already changed work the way it is today from 20 years ago. And it will displace millions of workers. If women don't acquire the necessary skills, wage gaps can widen, and many women may leave the workforce altogether. I don't know about you, but this really frightens me. It frightens me because women have spent decades trying to close the wage gap, and for it to widen again, it's concerning. But this is a really big but and an optimistic but. If women acquire the technical and leadership skills, they have the best chance of succeeding in the age of automation. So this is, I actually think it's a very hopeful discussion that we're going to have today. It's not all doom and gloom. And so I recently met Laura Blankenship. She is the founding head of San Francisco Girls School. It's an all-girls school that will be starting in San Francisco, a girls' high school that's starting in San Francisco next year. She is actively thinking about the future for girls and how to prepare them in the next generation. And she actually put this panel together. So Laura, I would like to thank you for doing this and also reaching out and convincing two other amazing panelists to join us in this conversation. The first is Mekala Krishnan. She is a senior fellow at McKinsey, and she's a co-author of this report that inspired this discussion. It's, let me get the title, The Future of Women at Work, Transition in the Age of Automation. I would actually recommend reading the report. It's very insightful and optimistic. And Mekala, thank you for the work you did there. We also have Maria Klawe joining us. I'm very excited about speaking to her. She's the president at Harvey Med College. and she is the first woman to hold this position. She has done a lot of work around diversity and equity, and I look forward to hearing her views on this topic, of course. She's told me the stats as I was speaking to her, preparing for this panel, sorry, and it is amazing the amount of women she has been able to bring on to the college as is just in such a short period of time. It's very inspiring. I think the best way to start is if I can ask all of you to introduce yourselves and then briefly talk about the work you do around preparing girls for the future. And Laura, if you don't mind, if I can put you on the spot first, can you introduce yourself and
Sure.
talk your future project?
Thank you.
Project, I should say.
Yes. Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here. As Xochi said, I am the founding head of school of San Francisco Girls School, but I've had about 20 years of experience in all girls education before I came here to take on this project. I worked in higher ed at Bryn Mawr College and most recently at the Baldwin School, which is a pre-K to 12 all girls school just outside of Philadelphia. And I started a computer science program at the Baldwin School. Started out as a very small 2 students in a library trying to create code to a full-fledged pre-K to 12 program that educates several hundred girls in computer science. So that's been one of my favorite accomplishments so far. I'm really looking forward to taking that much further. It's obviously a passion of mine to work with girls and something I read a lot about and research a lot about, and I am really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Laura. Yes, it is exciting about the Girls' School in San Francisco. It's a really wonderful project. And Maria, if you can you've had an amazing career in the STEM fields and maybe not a straight line, as in which you've done over the past year. So I'd love for you to tell us about that.
So, hi, I'm Maria Klawe. I'm a mathematician and computer scientist. I have been at a number of different institutions. I was at IBM Research early in my career, and then in San Jose, and then I went to the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, partly because our kids were 3 and 6 at that time, and I wanted them to go to French immersion. And so I was the head of computer science there, and then a vice president, then a dean of science. Then I went to be dean of engineering at Princeton. So I've done the Ivy League, and I've been president. This is my 15th year as president at Harvey Mudd College, which is a tiny STEM liberal arts college. And I will just say I'm the first female to hold my job for the last 32 years. So I'm used to being, I'm used to advocating for women pretty much everywhere. And one of the things I'm super happy about at Mudd is we're 50-50 male-female. We're about 30% female when I arrived. We were about 10 to 12% female in computer science. We're now 50-50. I'm 50-50 in physics and 50-50 in engineering. So, and the one thing, I mean, I take very little credit for this. It's really, we have fantastic faculty who are really innovative in curriculum and pedagogy. We've also become racially very diverse over the last several years as well. So I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you, Maria. I think that's amazing. I believe you started as your role as president in 2005, is that correct?
2006.
Oh, 2006, I'm sorry. So less than 15 years. Those numbers are so impressive. Thank you. So sorry, I'm gonna jump on to Mekala. If you could introduce yourself, and hopefully I won't put you on the spot, I would love you to also go in to talk about the summary of your report. I think it will be a really good starting point for our conversation.
Sure. Thanks, Xochi, and thanks for the invitation, Laura, to join this panel. I'm really excited to hear from you all. So just quickly about myself, I'm a senior fellow at the McKinsey Global Institute, which is McKinsey and Company's business and economics research arm. It's essentially our think tank inside of McKinsey. I actually am an engineer by training. I got my undergrad degree in mechanical engineering at the Indian Institute of Technology in Delhi. I was one of 5 girls, I believe, in a class of 200 in mechanical engineering. My mother was actually the first female engineer at also the Indian Institute of Technology in Delhi. So I guess I was stepping into big shoes. I then got my PhD in mechanical engineering from Cornell. I did my work in nanotech and fluid mechanics, but the reason I joined McKinsey after that was I felt like the process of innovation, going from a lab to at-scale technology, was not something that my field, which is microfluidics, had really seen at scale. And so I really wanted to understand the connection between the research world and the business world. And somehow along the way, my meandering career led me to the McKinsey Global Institute. But it's been an amazing, fun ride, because I feel like I'm an engineer now doing economics, which I think is something that the economics field badly needs. So I'm happy to be doing that. But really, I mean, the reason I say the story is this is partly what's inspired me to work on the portfolio work I do at MGI. So I spend a lot of my time looking at labor markets more broadly, but various kinds of inequalities in labor markets, gender inequality being the primary kind. And I am also coming from India. I'm really interested in it, not just from a US perspective, but also from a global perspective. It's actually kind of astounding how much, of course, there are differences across geographies, but so many of the underlying issues are really the same. So just talking about the research, so we've done a variety of different pieces of work in the last about 10 years, looking at this topic of gender inequality. And we started by looking at it quite broadly, right? To say what do gender gaps look like in different parts of the world? How does one even define gender equality? What's the economic case for gender equality? But most recently, we did the piece of work that Xochi referred to, which is trying to understand how future trends, in this case, automation and the future of work, could impact women globally. I went into the research expecting that the story would be largely a pessimistic one, right? Would be one that said that women would be more affected, women's jobs would be more at risk. But actually, it was surprisingly a story of being at a crossroads. So the analogy I always make is women and men are running the same race. It's a race where at the end you could end up with a better prize, but women are running the race with a weight around their ankles. So it's about how we remove the weight. So just to give you a little bit of a sense of what the research found. So firstly, when people think about automation, they immediately think about job losses, right? Machines taking over our jobs. And certainly there is a lot of expectation that we have that various forms of automation technologies, everything from a robot on a factory floor to frankly a chat bot, doing financial services activity. There's a variety of places and arenas where we could see automation and the future of work disrupt activities and potentially impact jobs. But there's also actually enormous opportunities we see for job gains. So while about 1 in 5 jobs on average could be automated, we also find about 1 in 4 jobs could be gained. And those job gains come from a few different sectors. There's, of course, sectors like healthcare and education, which we expect to grow. Healthcare in particular, as demographics in many countries shift. Sectors like tech, of course, that we expect to grow. So I think there's a good news in terms of, there's a worrisome news in terms of automation, but there's a good news in terms of opportunity creation and new jobs. And in some sense, from an economics perspective, we've always been in this cycle, right? We navigated from agriculture to a manufacturing-based economy to a services-based economy, and this is at its core that transition continuing. So really, it's about how we navigate the transition. So when we look at women's jobs, we look at men's jobs, we find they're both somewhat equally at risk, right? So there are certain sectors that women are in, things like retail, certain sectors that men are in, things like manufacturing, and both of these could be disrupted by automation. There are some sectors that women are in, like healthcare and education, some sectors that men are in, like tech, and both of these could be impacted by job gains. So net, what we find is that women and men on average need to transition jobs at roughly equal rates. That number for women is about 40 to 160 million jobs that may need to transition by 2030. That's a huge number. Up to 1 in 4 women may need to shift occupations in some way by 2030 in our most aggressive automation scenario. That number is similar for men too. About 1 in 4 men may need to transition occupations. The good news is we end up in a place where we have quote unquote better jobs, right? So they're jobs that maybe better paid. They're jobs that may be more fulfilling. If you think about a nurse in a hospital setting, she may spend less time, or he may spend less time doing patient entries, but more time actually interacting with patients. So we may actually do more fulfilling work. So the end state may be a better state, but the question is, how do we enable the transition? So it's all about the transition that needs to occur in economies and societies, and how do we position men and women to be able to capture that transition in equal parts. And I think the challenge is that we find this is the weight around the ankle, that women may be starting this journey without the same level playing field, right? So what do you need for a successful transition? You need time for reskilling. In many parts of the world, women actually have, frankly, less leisure time, the time they spend in the paid economy, the time that they spend on childcare, work in the home means that they have less leisure time. Oftentimes women also, we've seen surveys that say women feel less of an imperative to invest in themselves. So there's this whole question of how do you drive reskilling? The second challenge is that to make these transitions, you need to recognize there are opportunities. You need to have the right networks, the right sponsorship, the right creation of opportunity, which may oftentimes be more of a challenge for women than for men. And then finally, the transition is in large parts associated with certain types of skills, many of which are tech skills, STEM skills, right? These are the new careers of the future. And so, at least as of today, women and men don't possess these skills in equal rates. There's various things I mean, I'm speaking in huge generalities, of course, right? But in general, these are the types of things you need for the transition. And women may not be starting that transition from the same level playing field. But the good news is we can do something about that. So I'm a little bit with you, Xochi. I think there's a risk that we don't navigate this transition well, women fall further behind. But I think this is also a moment of opportunity. And if we do navigate this transition well, we will end up in a better place. So I'm choosing to see the glass half full.
Thank you, Mekala. Talking about the transition, I mean, Maria seeing like the pipeline right in the middle of college, higher education. And I would love for you to talk about the STEM field and how women or young girls are going into the different academic studies.
Thank you. So the first thing I will say is that the representation of women in different STEM fields varies enormously. So for example, if we look at the life sciences, women are more than half the undergraduates, and they're getting 40% of the PhDs. Women have been 50% of MDs for a long time. I'm giving US figures, and they do differ somewhat around the world, but I would say the things I'm telling you are fairly consistent for all of North America and for much of Europe as well. If we look at physics, computer science, and engineering, those are the fields where we see very few women. And typically, we've been seeing on the order of 15 to 18% of graduates in computer science are female, similar for many fields of engineering, and similar for physics. But what is promising is that a number of universities across North America have changed how they teach some of these disciplines, particularly computer science, but also engineering, and have been able to show that if they change both curriculum and pedagogy, women come and stay and thrive. And the things they change are, number one, and not diminishing the rigor in any sense, but adding applications from day one. So your introductory class would have, in say computer science, would have the fundamental concepts from computer science, but your assignments would show you how these apply to epidemiology or apply to traffic organization or just things, because one of the things we've learned is, and this happens to apply to underrepresented minorities as well, is that when you incorporate applications right from the start, so you show people how what you're learning can be used to have an impact in society, it's very attractive to women. So the half full part of this discussion, as Mekala says, is that it's not that hard to attract girls and women to these disciplines if you teach them the right way. And the other thing I would say that's really important about the teaching is the growth mindset approach. So you don't start your class by saying, look to the left, look to the right. One of you won't be here by graduation time or by the end of this course. You start your class by saying, okay, this is a challenging class. Everyone who works hard and asks for help and takes help is going to do just fine. So I'll leave it there because I have a feeling that Laura is going to have some similar things to say.
It's true. It's true. I was thinking about your curriculum and pedagogy. I think I've been talking about that application part of computer science and engineering in particular for a long time, that's a really important aspect for girls, for them to be able to understand how these concepts, whether it's computer science or life sciences, physics, all of it, how does it apply in the real world? And another aspect that's really important is how does it help people? Girls really want to see that that they can have an impact and particularly on helping people. And they're really, so if you can leverage that in your teaching in any way, it's really has a big impact on helping them persist. One of the, Maria just talked about some of the not great statistics on computer science and engineering for women in undergrad. And that actually starts in middle school and high school, that there's a big drop off in interest. And part of that has to do with stereotypes that girls themselves see or that society sees about what a scientist is, what a computer scientist is. And so girls get this impression that if I'm going to be a computer scientist or an engineer or any kind of scientist, I need to be a certain way. And if they don't feel like they are that way, then they don't want to go into that. But there's also just the idea of offering these courses in different ways. So one of the things that I've worked on, I was on the Computer Science Teachers Association board for a while, is getting computer science to be required in high schools, to count for high school graduation. And there's been a significant amount of progress on it, but there's still a long way to go. Only about 47% of all high schools even offer computer science. And only 2 states, Nevada and South Carolina, I'm really surprised California is not in there, require computer science for graduation. Many states, about a lot of them, more than half of them, will allow it to count for either a math or science graduation requirement, but that's, not all of them. And many states, including California, leave it up to the individual school district as to whether it's allowed to count for a graduation requirement, despite the fact in California that the UC system will allow it to count as either one of the math or science admissions requirements. And that would go a long way to helping girls really engage with computer science and engineering. Because girls are less likely to sign up for those electives. And so if you require it, then they will, they'll be required to take it and they get that exposure. And then if you're using the pedagogical strategies that Maria just mentioned, then you're going to get them to persist and take that elective after that first required course and then go on to take courses in college. So that is one thing that I think we've made a lot of progress on lately, and that we can continue to work on in terms of changing some of the graduation requirements at the state level, at the school district level. And then, the colleges, many colleges have made those changes, I know, in terms of asking students in other disciplines to take a computer science course, or requiring different kinds of science, or changing up their science requirements for graduation to engage more women and people of color.
Great, thank you, Laura. I think I feel like there has been a lot of progress that's made around women education and identifying the STEM skills which are needed in the future. And Mekala, I would love for you to talk about, I believe in the research, there was something around frontier jobs. And as we train the girls and women now and give them the right skills, how do we ensure that they're part of the process of in the forefront of technology?
Yeah, maybe Xochi, before I answer that, I think Sasha, I saw your hand was raised. Did you have a question?
Let me see.
Hey, yeah, sorry. Just really quickly, how much do you think the curriculum for public schools in certain states is related to just like they don't have the resources? I went to public school, we didn't have a computer lab,
Right.
therefore there wasn't computer science.
Yes, I think that's a good question. And so one of the other aspects that a lot of these organizations are working on is helping states figure out the funding model to provide some of those resources. California actually had put a significant amount of funding in place for teacher training and equipment, whatever might be needed to get some programs like that off the ground. It's been deferred, unfortunately, because of COVID at the moment, but that is an issue and something that needs to be addressed as well.
Maria, I would love to hear from you. I mean, you must get students with all different levels when they start Harvey Mudd. How do you deal with those issues?
So one of the things at Harvey Mudd is that every student has to take a computer science course in their first semester. Now they also have to take a chemistry course and a physics course and a writing course and math courses. I mean, so it's not, we're not distinguishing computer science from other areas. Every student within their first 3 semesters is going to take courses in all areas of science and engineering, as well as math and humanities, social sciences, and the arts. So we have a huge range of prior experience. We have students who've never written a line of code or, just had absolutely zero experience with computer science. We have students who have taken several courses in college. And so what we do is we basically have an introductory course, which is sort of for students who have taken up to one, for instance, AP course in computer science. And we have 2 sections that we divide into 2 colors. Our colors are, so I will show you on my t-shirt, are black and gold and white. And so we have 2 colors of sections of the intro course. There's CS5 Gold and CS5 Black. CS5 Gold is for people with really no experience, and CS5 Black is for people with, say, up to an AP class. And then we have, for the students who've taken way too many courses, we put them in still another section altogether where we combine the first 2 courses in it. That's called CS42. Now, the important part about CS5 Black and Gold is that, first of all, they're taught at the same time. So if a student starts out in gold, but feels actually really they could handle the more advanced section, they can change at any time during the semester and vice versa. What we're trying to make sure is, since we know that many more female students will come with less experience than the male students, so we want to make sure that both sections, Black and Gold, even though they have a big difference in prior experience, are ready to take the next course in the sequence, which is called CS60. And so the way our instructors do this is, for CS5 Gold, they just go straight through the material, preparing them for the next course. But for CS5 Black, they essentially spend half the time on the material in CS5 Gold, and the other half, they teach them other areas related to computer science that are interesting, but have absolutely nothing to do with the next 2 courses after CS5. Because what you don't want to do, what you want to make sure is that you take your students who had this very different preliminary preparation, and by the time you get to the second course in the sequence, they're really in the same place. And it works, because this is one of the things, that's how we managed to get to 50% female in computer science, because we're not seeing 50% female in CS5 Black or in CS42. For 42, we're very deliberately keeping them out of interaction with the intro students. because we don't want the standard thing to happen that I'm a female and I interact with a student who seems to know way more than I do. And I just assume that I'm never going to be as successful. So the first time those students in 42 will actually interact with the students in either of the intro sections is the third course in the sequence. And by then, people have learned enough stuff, it seems to be fine.
Great, thank you, Maria. I think that's fascinating that you can able to have those different tracks, but still at the end, everyone be at the same place. So Mekala, if you can talk about, thank you for noticing Sasha's hand. I appreciate that. Can you talk about the frontier jobs and also maybe people that have just graduated from college and they need to, it's probably a fact of life that we're going to have to transition many times into different roles. So how do you ensure people are successfully able to do this?
Yeah, so we talk about in the work something called frontier jobs, which is essentially, I mean, as the name suggests, right? It's essentially jobs at the cutting edge, at the frontier. The problem is that most of these jobs today, whether that's people building AI or people that are managing blockchain or things of that kind, they tend to be male dominated, but it doesn't have to be that way. So the interesting thing about how the economy transitions is that every time there's a big transition, there's a chunk of jobs that are created that didn't exist in the past. So in general, we find that about 10% of jobs tend to be jobs in these entirely new sectors, entirely new occupations that didn't exist previously. I mean, one example or two examples I always give is, think back 30 years ago, would you have imagined a profession that was a social media manager or a profession that was a blockchain specialist, right? These were jobs we couldn't even fathom in the past, and they now exist. So the good news is they're entirely without shackles, right? So Laura, you alluded to this a little bit in your remarks about girls maybe not seeing themselves in these roles. The good news is these roles didn't exist, so there's nobody to see or not see. Now, the challenge is that they do tend to come from professions that were historically male dominated of some kind, right? So if you are a biostatistician, that arises from the statistics field. But at the same time, it is a relatively clean slate. So there is an opportunity. We've talked to some companies, for example, where their entire blockchain group is women or majority women, right? So there is an opportunity as a company also to think about this with a relatively clean slate. I think the other important aspect of frontier jobs is it's important for women to be in these roles, not just because these are high paying, quality jobs at the frontier, exciting professions, but it's also important for women to be at the center of actually conducting the work in these jobs, right? Whether that's creating these technologies. I'm sure everybody is familiar with the argument about women needing to be at the center of creating AI. And that's for a few different reasons, right? It's because we want to bring the best talent to bear as we develop the products of the future. We want to ensure that these products actually cater to a diverse population, the needs of diverse populations, and all of that requires that they're actually created by diverse talent. So for all of these reasons, it's important to ensure that women are at the center of this. But again, with my glass half full lens, I think there is an opportunity here if we're essentially starting from somewhat of a clean slate at least. And then I forget your second question. So.
Oh, I think no, I think that was perfect. Yes, I forgot it too. No, that was lovely. Thank you. I would like for Laura to talk, if you don't mind, a little bit about preparing young girls for these skills, and especially at a fairly young age. I mean, it can't all just be about STEM, right? There has to be other aspects that are just as important. So
yeah, no, absolutely. I think I think of STEM and computer science, all of those as really a way of thinking, and thinking in terms of systems, in terms of a process, in terms of generating hypotheses, and you can use those skills pretty much anywhere. And I think when you think about taking those skills and then maybe leveraging them for these frontier jobs, you want girls who can feel comfortable taking some risk. These kinds of jobs are things that are not there anymore or not there right now, and they may not know where they're going to go. They may not know how it's going to turn out. So getting them comfortable with that. So giving them places within their classrooms and their schools to take smaller risks so that they can kind of figure out how to learn from learning the unknown and failing a little bit and learning from that. And also working in teams. I mean, a lot of these jobs are, you know, they're startup mentalities if they're not startups already, where you have a small team of people doing a lot of different things, wearing a lot of different hats and having to work quickly and work together and communicate well, sometimes communicating across oceans, you know, from people are working from different places. We're experiencing that right now. So having, you know, those kinds of soft skills, social skills. I read a statistic recently that the kinds of jobs where you need math skills and not any social skills have increased maybe by 5%. And the jobs where you need really high math skills and really high social skills have increased by like 25%. So the combination of STEM skills plus really strong social skills, leadership, teamwork, all of those things is super important. And I think, you know, schools like mine, like all K through 12 schools need to shift to including more of those group projects, giving kids the opportunity to work together and to learn from that, giving them the opportunity to, you know, step up and try some new things that might be in the classroom, you know, push them out of their comfort zone a little bit. Or it might be having programs where they can take a lead role in taking something on, taking on a project of some kind for the school, rather than focusing so much on individual achievement all the time. Sometimes, you know, that's important. You want to give kids that opportunity, but you also want to give them the opportunity to feel what it's like to achieve something as a group and to learn from that experience.
Thank you. Maria, I think you have talked about this as a philosophy in Harvey Mudd as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, so, I mean, I think the reason Harvey Mudd graduates are so successful, and one of the reasons we're so successful with women, is we collaborate from day one. And we also really emphasize the soft skills as well, communication, teamwork, leadership. We also have a big emphasis on humanity. For STEM school, we have a big emphasis on humanities, social sciences, and the arts. And one of the things we talk a lot about is creative problem solving. And the reason we talk about it this way is I so far have not met a young person, male or female, who would not like to be seen as creative. And if they're at a STEM institution, they definitely want to be seen as a problem solver. And, you know, when I think about the frontier groups, so the frontier jobs, one of the things we have just started at Harvey Mudd is something called the postdoc and interdisciplinary computation. Because one of the things we know is that if you look at any part of society, they're going to need some computational skills. And so we have 2 postdocs. I mean, we're a tiny place. We have 900 students. Actually, we have 837 right now because of the pandemic. But anyhow, we have 2 postdocs who started this summer. We're both biologists, and they're actually taking all of the first year computer science this semester. And they don't have they have used computational skills in their work, but they have not taken a lot of formal computer science. And then we have somebody starting robotics and somebody starting next semester. And again, they're going to be learning computer science. The ones who started in the summer, they will be taking more advanced computer science classes next semester. And then in their second year of the postdoc, they're going to help teach courses at the interface of their discipline and computer science. And it's a 3-year postdoc program. And we think that if we can show this works and these people actually get good jobs, then we're going to scale up to probably a dozen of the top research universities once we've actually showed that this can work. But this is, I mean, I'm somebody who did her PhD in mathematics at a time when great academic positions for mathematicians there might have been 20 in all of North America, and there were 1,000 people applying for them. I got one of those 20 positions, but I hated it. There were no ethnic restaurants in the middle of nowhere in Michigan, and no boyfriends, and just nothing that I wanted. So I went back to start a second PhD in computer science the year after I finished my PhD in mathematics. And I happened to choose the University of Toronto, partly because I'm Canadian, but partly because it's one of the top 3 places for theoretical computer science at the time, and it still is. And oh my goodness, I am so lucky to have done that, because my entire career, I've had the opportunity to work in between math and computer science. And I think we need so many more people who can bridge disciplines. And those are going to be the people who can develop the frontier technologies and push those. And so one of the things for this particular postdoc in interdisciplinary computation is, to apply for it, you had to write a diversity statement. Of course, you had to write a teaching statement and a research statement. But one of the best ways we found to identify people who actually really care about diversity and attract diverse candidates is to require diversity.
You know, can I just add one like personal anecdote to that? One of the most, I love that phrase, creative problem solvers that I worked with at McKinsey has a PhD in linguistics. And she had never worked with an Excel spreadsheet till she came to McKinsey. And she has like the best modeling, best intuition for numbers of so many people that I worked with. And I think it speaks to, a way of thinking, right, that she's been trained in as a linguist, that she can then translate to doing analytical problem solving and conceptual problem solving.
So I have to tell you about my daughter, whose first name is Sasha, who, so she did a law degree, and she got all these research positions. She did a law degree at some place in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And she got all these research positions there. And she said, they hire me because I can actually do Excel spreadsheets, and most lawyers can't. And later that year, and of course I tried to persuade her. She's very good at math, and she would be great at computer science. But of course, her comment was, I have 2 parents who do mathematics and computer science and an older brother. I'm doing something totally different. So, but later, I think in her 3rd year of law school, she sent an email to her brother saying, I'm really interested in international law, and I want to build this interactive website like this one at Stanford Law School that shows, if you're in this part of a country with various conflicts, what international law actually applies. And so she sends this to her brother, and she says, I realized I'd have to learn how to program. How long do you think it would take me to learn this? And he writes back and he says, oh, I can teach you in 2 hours. And so they showed up in Claremont, and by then she was already developing this website that she wanted to develop. So, we have to encourage people that it does take effort. It's like learning a foreign language. Initially it feels really challenging, but if you persist, everybody can learn it.
And it is just another language.
Yeah.
Thank you, Maria. I think it's a very good example of how we need to transition to future-proof our careers, and we probably will have to do it many times throughout our careers at the rate that technology is changing. If there's any questions, please, you can put it in the chat, or you can raise your hand. Hopefully I can see it this time. But in the meantime, while you guys are thinking of questions, I would love to hear, Mekala, from you, because I think you've done some work around the pandemic in the last, 10 months. And has that shifted the way women work?
Yeah, so we've done a few pieces of work looking at how the pandemic globally is affecting women. And I think, on the one hand, of course, the health numbers would suggest that men are more susceptible and vulnerable to COVID than women are. But in many other ways, women have been more affected. So as maybe the most stark example, we did some work that was released in July. I think the numbers are probably even more stark if we look today. But as of July, women had made up about 39% of the global workforce pre-pandemic, and they accounted for about 54% of the overall job losses. So a disproportionate share of job losses were women. And at first we thought this was just because of the sectors and occupations that women are in compared to where men work. The women work in sectors like retail, they work in the restaurant industry, but that only explains about a quarter of the gap. So the remaining 3/4, we don't know, but we can speculate, right? Why that is. So some of the reasons we think are the fact that women are taking on a disproportionate share of childcare and home responsibilities in the pandemic. And we know there's surveys that have suggested that some women have dropped out of the workforce as a result. Some women are certainly cutting back hours, holding back on promotions as a result of all of this. The other, and I think this is maybe a bit more true for emerging economies, but also to some degree developed economies, I think there's this bias that exists that says that when jobs are scarce, they should go to men versus women. We looked at data from something called the World Values Survey, and more than 50% of respondents in South Asia and many Middle Eastern countries agree with that statement. But that number in developed economies is also about 20-30% of respondents that agree with that statement. So that may be playing a role just in, as jobs have come back, who's been prioritized for the jobs that have come back. And then there may be other issues as well in terms of access to finance, access to digital technologies, because a lot of work has become virtual. So if there is a digital divide, that may be hurting women. We don't quite know what explains the rest of this gap, but these are some reasons. Women also tend to work in smaller sized firms, so they may have been the ones that have gone under. So I think, again, here, there is a risk that all the slow gains we've been making pre-pandemic, we actually reverse as a result of this. And I think this is why, as people have thought about the whole next normal, quote unquote, and building back better, how do we put gender and an inclusive recovery at the heart of that? And that's everything from how we think about investments and stimulus. So do we put childcare, for example, we think about that as infrastructure in the same way as we think about buildings and roadways and bridges as infrastructure. Childcare is also infrastructure that helps enable an economy. How do we think about digital infrastructure and ensuring that women continue to gain the skills? Any stimulus that is going towards reskilling, women are a part of that. I think these are all conversations we need to be having now as we think about the next 6 to 12 months and the recovery ahead.
Yep. Thank you, Mekala. We now have some questions, so I'll start off with the first question, and please chime in. Is teaching CS after school effective? So it's not part of the school curriculum. I don't know, Laura, if you have very strong thoughts about this.
I do. It can be, but more effective is teaching in school. There was actually a recent study that came out. There's been a couple of studies around this, and the most recent one was done by Google and Gallup, where they found that if you are in school and taking about 5+ hours of computer science, which would equate to probably a required course, you are about 69% of girls who are in that scenario are interested in continuing to take computer science after high school. And actually some other studies show that girls who just do computer science after school are actually less likely to continue. Just something about, what Maria was saying about this stuff is hard. Sometimes the after school programs don't incorporate the rigor into the programs. It's just fun. And so they, sign up for that computer science class and they find out it's a little bit hard. And so they feel like they had a little bit of a bait and switch there. That's one, there's no research behind that particular, what girls actually are thinking, but that's one idea that maybe those after school programs just don't give you the best sense of what it's really like to be in a computer science class.
Great. Yeah, and other questions are coming in quite fast. So would you have, I think Maria, because you had very you had a very STEM background. I think I've heard you talk about how you knew at a very early age that math was an art, was going to be your passion. So if a parent has 2 daughters, young, 4 and 6, what would you do to encourage them at an early age and interest in STEM and help them start learning?
So one thing, there's a nonprofit that has a coding game called CodeSpark that I would certainly recommend. It's very gender inclusive, and it also portrays different. So for instance, the character that does the if then else is the doctor, because you have to diagnose, and the character who does the repetitive stuff is a construction worker, and because you tend to do very repetitive stuff. So that's something I would certainly take a look at. Dreambox Learning also has, I don't know their work quite as well as CodeSpark, but I think they also have some nice things. But mostly what I would try to do, I mean, when my kids were small, I constantly told them number stories. So if you have two pirates and they find some treasure, and in this treasure, there are 5 bars of gold and 8 silver coins. How many bars do they each get, and how many silver coins? And of course, you know, because 5 is not divisible by 2, then this turns out to be an argument. Or, I mean, I would just constantly be just talking about things that I find really interesting. So at one point at our daughter's 8th birthday party, our son, who was then 11, had a friend who's 12. And while we're eating cake and ice cream, the 12-year-old boy says to me, "I want to tell you about complex numbers." And so anyway, he starts drawing this graph and tells me that, you know, this imaginary number, if you square it, you get -1. And I'm going like, "Michael, how do you know this?" And he said, "Oh, Yannick told me several years ago." And I said, "How does that," Yannick is our son, "how did Yannick know it?" And he looks at me like I'm an idiot and said, "You told him when he was like 6. So, I mean, I think, you know, from my perspective, just finding lots of different ways to expose your children to thinking about these things. And, you know, there's a variety of, I'm a very big believer in, you know, toys that you can build things with, and Lego, but there's Lego robotics, and there's a variety of other kinds of things. So getting your children involved in creative problem solving from a very young age. I mean, I think my son was 4 when he said to me, "Mom, did you know that 5 has a middle and 4 doesn't?" And I went, "Yeah, what made you think of that?" And he goes, "Look at your hand. 5 has a middle, 4 doesn't." So then I think I'm really being very smart and saying, "Well, so which numbers have middles?" And he looks at me like I'm just completely dumb. And he says, "Mom, it's the odd numbers, of course." So, I mean, I'm a mathematician. My husband's a mathematician. It's impossible for us not to talk mathematics with children. But talk about whatever you love.
Thank you, Maria.
My daughter, I have a 2-year-old, so she's now started learning how to negotiate. So if I sing a song, I'm like 1 time, and then she replies 2 times, and now she's saying 3 times. So I'm glad you said what you said, Maria. I'm going to do it more.
Yeah, yeah.
She's counting because of her negotiation.
That sounds like my daughter.
So, Laura, there has been a question for you. They would like for you to talk about the SF Girls High School. And another question that's come in is, how would you suggest getting a 13-year-old girl into computer science when it's not part of the curriculum? I don't know if you're, I'm not sure. I don't know about CodeSpark, so I don't know the age that it goes up to.
So the high school, the new high school, is an all-girls school. It's going to be in the middle of San Francisco. We're creating, I loved hearing all these discussions about interdisciplinary, bringing different disciplines together, because we are building this really interdisciplinary STEM curriculum, because I didn't really say I actually have my PhDs in rhetoric and composition, and then I ended up in computer science because I was doing it on the side, and then eventually made it into my career when I got to Bryn Mawr College. I think that logical thinking of rhetoric is not that different. So we're really building this very interdisciplinary program that is all girls. So having that really safe environment, as I was talking about before, to take risks and learn from failure, to diminish things like grading bias and stereotype threat that often prevent girls from seeing themselves in some of these STEM fields, and also give them all these opportunities to combine those science classes and those science concepts with arts, design, humanities, whatever their interests may be. So finding ways to explore their passions in another field, maybe through STEM. I actually am planning to teach a course on computer science and art, mostly data science and art. It's one of my favorite courses to teach, and that's a good way to get girls involved. One of the first courses I ever taught was an electronics course where it was using fabric. It was brand new at the time, and now people do this all the time. You make these circuits with cloth and thread. I'm a terrible sewer. I'm really, really bad at this. But you get the opportunity to learn about circuits and electronics and engineering using things that girls often really enjoy, which is, creating stuffed animals, creating dresses, I created a weird thing for my cat, because that's, what you do. I tracked my cat around the neighborhood with this, weird electronic scarf that I made. And so getting girls to do things like that. And there's lots of places where you can do that. And you can find all this stuff online too, and you can order all of it and do it at home. You don't have to go somewhere to do it. I think 13-year-old girls, they want to be cool. They don't want to stand out. So when you're thinking about how do you get them interested in something that you think they might be good at, but that they don't think is cool, you figure out what they think is cool and then combine it with that. It could be reading, it could be sewing, fashion, it could be TV shows, it could be writing. I've seen girls get involved in computer science or STEM from a lot of different avenues.
Great, thank you, Laura. Yeah, it's always hard with teenagers, isn't it?
Yeah. That's why they're fun, though.
Well, unfortunately, we don't have time for any more questions. So I know there's some outstanding questions. I'll reach out to each of you individually, and I can try to get them answered, because I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Maria, Laura, and Mekala, thank you so much for joining us and having this topic. I actually do feel we're at a crossroad, Mekala, and I am optimistic. So I think there's a lot to be done from now until 2030. So thank you. Thank you for all participating in the call. Yes, and if there's any other questions anybody has, feel free to email me or Colleen about them, and we'll try to get them answered for you. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.